Now, you've been working so well. I just think you deserve a little bit of a rest. So just sit back, relax, put a cup of tea on, listen to some calming music, and I'll read you a little story. Okay, so here's a little story just to calm yourself through the day. So hope you're enjoying this one here. This is Goldilocks and the Three Bears, adapted for operations management. Once upon a time, there was Goldilocks and the Three Bears. She was desperate to make them happy, and so she wanted to make them some cupcakes. So she went to the kitchen and looked around and found some eggs ready to make these lovely cupcakes for the Three Bears. She grabbed the eggs, put them in the bowl, and whisked them and made a beautiful cupcake for the first bear. Then she went for the second one and made the second cupcake for the second bear. Oh, they were so happy. And along came the third one for the third cupcake for the third bear. But oh no, these cakes smelled so good that all these customers started coming to the side of the shop wanting the cupcakes before she had a chance to give them to the Three Bears. So what happened next? Well, she wanted the money. So she sold the first cupcake to the customers and they were very happy. And then she sold the second cupcake and then the third cupcake. And the customers were so happy, but they were clamoring for so much more. But she had no more cupcakes to give. So suddenly these happy customers turned into very sad customers. And the bears were also very sad too, because they had no cupcakes at all. So desperately to solve the situation, Goldilocks went out and got a whole bunch of eggs. But now the customers had walked away and the bears were in a very bad mood and they didn't want the eggs either. So the eggs went off and they were all disgusting and everyone was sick. The end of the story. Now, in that little story there, if you're still awake and you're still with me, the idea being is this is very much about what's called materials. This is getting our materials right. And just like in Goldilocks, we don't want too much. We don't want too little. We want it to be just right. Hello and welcome to our lesson on materials management strategies, which we use to try and improve the efficiency and effectiveness of our operations management system. So taking the study design dot point, what we want to do here is, as I said before, we want to improve the efficiency and the effectiveness of our operations using the focus on materials. So we want to worry about our forecasting, this thing called master production schedule, materials requirement planning, and this item called just in time. These are all strategies to improve our use of materials in our operations management production system. Okay, so firstly, what do we mean by materials management? Well, the word itself, materials, comes from the word raw materials. So what we're trying to do here is manage our raw materials. We want to get this classic Goldilocks and the two bear scenario. We want just enough. We don't want too much. We don't want too little. We want it to be just right. Okay, so we're talking about how we organize and monitor the delivery, storage, and use of our raw materials, which obviously is one of our resources. So these are our natural resources. And in this scenario here, we have our eggs. We want to manage how many eggs we have, how they're ordered, how they're stored, how they're used in our production process so that we can create the very best cake from it. So it's about quality, it's about storage, delivery, and about getting the right raw material resources that we require. Now you can imagine this is a very fine art because this is constantly fluctuating. As we're using the eggs to make the cupcakes, we're going to need to replace them with some more eggs. Again, we order too many, they're going to go off. So too much, and we not only tie up capital, money, so we tie up money that we've bought these eggs. We're going to waste storage space because we've got to find somewhere to put all these eggs and they're going to be taking up the whole area. Now, fair enough for eggs, but if you can imagine you're running a production facility for making cars, then suddenly where are you going to store all these tires? Where are you going to store all these sheets of metal that aren't going to go off and get damaged by the elements? So storage space is really critical. We don't want too much because we're going to tie up storage space. And if we do have too much stored away, we're going to risk these eggs going off, perishing, or the tires out there getting damaged by the rain or etc. So getting too much stock risks us tying up money. That's a bad situation for businesses. If we tie up our money in too much stock, we're going to waste space trying to find places to store it. We're also going to risk these items getting damaged by having too much. Equally, too little also runs the issue that we can't make anything at all. Suddenly, if we run out of eggs, then we can't make any cakes whatsoever. If we run out of tires, then we can't keep making cars and trying to put them on later. If we run out of sheets of metal, we can't try and do bits and pieces without the rest. So too little, and we run the issue of having to stop production completely. We might have to disrupt the deliveries and ultimately anger the customers. So again, this is a very fine art where we don't want too much, we don't want too little, we want it to be just right. So our first strategy related to materials and trying to get it just right is forecasting. Now, forecasting is a little bit like crystal ball gazing, okay? It's like looking into the future. It's trying to guess where we're going to be in the future, but based on what happened in the past. So forecasting is a materials planning tool that predicts customer demand for a future period based on past data and market trends. So let's take, for example, here, chocolate, okay? If we know how many we've sold in the past, we can try and predict how many we'll sell in the future and therefore make the production to match our future needs. So forecasting, using past data, trying to predict what we'll need in the future. So obviously this involves predicting what materials will be required and in what quantities. If you make the prediction too low and you run out of the product, you're going to lead to customer dissatisfaction. Imagine if you're making the chocolate bars and we don't have enough cocoa beans coming in, then we can't make the chocolate, we lose our customer base. If we make prediction too high and we order too much cocoa beans, too much stock, it's either going to go out of date, it's going to get wasted, or it's going to take up huge amounts of storage space. So we're going to have these cocoa beans everywhere, either perishing, going off, getting damaged, or not being used properly and not being suitable for our production. So again, we're just trying to get it just right. And forecasting is hopefully going to give us an insight into that. So let's develop this example a bit further and do a bit more of a deep dive in relation to chocolate. Chocolate's a fascinating product, and you know I love it already, but it has seasonal variations, which are, again, fascinating. I spoke to Shane Black once from Cocoa Black, and he was explaining that chocolate has a high demand in winter. It's that winter warming type of product. So he would base his production upon winter demand being bigger than summer demand when people don't really want chocolate. Equally, we know that there's special customer times every single year associated with chocolate. So we have the Easter bunny cycle. So we know at certain times of the year, we're going to want more chocolates at Easter. Equally, Christmas. Generally, one of those gifts you want to give to someone is a box of chocolates. So we know we're going to get peaks at those periods of times. Valentine's Day, when you give your betrothed a box of chocolates. Mother's Day, when you've forgotten them and gotten them the flowers and get them a box of chocolates. You can see my scenario that we can predict our future needs based on past experiences. That if we know there's a regular sequence, a seasonal pattern, then we can respond to that. So we can have our production based on what's happening. Something else to consider, though, is this idea that cocoa beans is a global product. Some countries like Ghana, in here, okay, is where we source the cocoa beans from. Now, if you can imagine having a country that far away that we have to have this product shipped to Australia, so that's in this case, take Cadbury in Hobart. Well, you've got a long delivery pattern and a time to take into account. So as we're doing our forecasting, we're going to have to forecast in the future. Okay, here comes Easter. We're going to have to scale up production. We might need to order a little bit earlier in advance to allow for those cocoa beans to make it there on time. Equally, we've also got to consider all sorts of things when you're dealing with a global supplier like Ghana. There might be fluctuations in exchange rates, which make the product more or less expensive. We might have to worry about the delivery time, okay? We might have to worry about all sorts of things like maybe market conditions come out reporting there's a link between chocolate and childhood obesity, and suddenly there's a decreased demand in chocolate. So all of these things can play out and affect this sequence, but we're trying to use forecasting as a bit of a way of trying to anticipate future demand and scale up our production so that come Easter, we have enough Easter bunnies and chocolate Easter eggs to meet customer demand. Again, not too little, not too much. We want it to try and be just right. And we're using past data to try and predict and anticipate what we need for the future. Okay, so what's the benefits of using forecasting as a technique where we're using past data to try and anticipate and foresee future demand? Well, hopefully, when we can anticipate that seasonal changes, we can adjust our orders and save on the costs and wastage. So the idea being we haven't got too much and we've got to throw it into the landfill, which will damage our environmental reputation. And we also don't have too little. And so we're getting our customers angry from the lack of it. So it can be great to try and anticipate these regular patterns. It also allows us to prevent over-ordering. So you can imagine not having cocoa beans spread over acres of our warehouse before we actually can use it in our production. So we can prevent over-ordering, we can anticipate seasonal demands and try and keep our customers happy. So this can be a really good strategy for trying to anticipate the future demand. However, I call it the running back principle. But let's take a background here where we have this little individual here and they're looking backwards. Because if you think about it, we're judging our future based upon what happened in the past. Now, the issue could be that we don't know what's happening in the future. For many businesses, this was COVID. They were running on previous cycles and patterns and anticipating the future and were ordering stock to account for things. And then suddenly the market literally disappeared where customers couldn't come out and buy these products from your store. So the idea being that unexpected events can happen and disrupt this prediction. So we thought it was going to be like this, but something comes along and we fall over the back of the hill because we can't look over our shoulder. That's because we're running backwards. We're looking at this idea that we can look at past data, but we can't see the future. So unexpected events can still catch us out. Also, if you can imagine it, we've got to get all this data on what are the past seasonal trends, how many people bought chocolates last Easter, in what categories and what volumes. So it does require a lot of time to track, anticipate, and analyze all of these impacts in the supply chain to make these predictions. So yes, it is useful to try and get these seasonal variations put into play, and we can anticipate when our peak moments are going to be, whether it be the Easter or Christmas, and build up production for that. But equally, things can catch us out from unexpected events, just disrupting that usual pattern of behavior. Okay, our next strategy in relation to materials management and trying to get that not too much, not too little, but just right scenario, is what's called a master production schedule. Now, colloquially, just in my own little way of explaining it to my students, I talk about the who, what, where, when, how, okay? This is a manual which writes down and records everything about the production of that good or service. Who do we make it? When do they make it? How do they make it? What quantities do they make it? It is literally a manual of everything that goes into making that good or service. So this is a master production schedule. This is our plan that outlines what a business intends to produce, what quantities, what period of time, who, what, when, where, how. Okay, everything's recorded here. And the idea is that by breaking down the whole production process into stages and determining exactly what is required, what needs to be produced and by when, then hopefully we can use this document to determine the quantity, demand of inputs over time. Okay, so you can imagine this has got everything detailed about it. If it was about chocolate, okay, who makes the chocolate? Where do they make it? When do they make it? What quantities? How much needs to be made from that to create this amount of output? All of that information gets put together. What are the delivery times? How long does it take to get the cocoa beans from Ghana? You put all of that into a plan, then hopefully that can help you in determining when you order materials and in what quantity to meet the perceived demands in the future. So very vigorous. It literally is a complete manual to how we actually make the product. But hopefully it's going to give us an insight into how much raw materials we need to order to meet production expectations. Okay, so let's work through another example of how we can use this master production schedule. So let's take, for example, we're making a Toyota car. We're making a Toyota Corolla, okay? So we can have in this manual all this detail. So what goods are to be produced? Okay, we're making a Toyota Corolla. It requires this type of wheelbase. It requires this type of engine. It requires this type of interior. So we've got all the goods written down and articulated what we need of all of those to make each Toyota Corolla. We then write in here as well how production will occur. Okay, are we going to do the stamping and the pressing of the metal to make the shape? At what point does the welding occur? At what point do the wheels get added and bolts, etc., etc.? So how will that occur? We write down all that information. So again, we get an idea. Okay, how many sheets of metal do we require? How many bolts do we require? How much of the interior upholstery do we require, and when? We write down when the production is to take place. Is it 24/7? Are there going to be certain peak periods? Are there seasonal variations we need to take account of? Where will it take place? Is there storage facilities for this materials to be stored before we actually start production? Who will do it? How many staff do we need? Where do we need them? So all of this, and then finally, which materials are required? And when and how, and you put all that together. So again, a massive great manual. The idea being is it's almost like the running over by bus scenario, that if heaven forbid somebody can no longer run that production line, well, someone else can pick up and use that manual to get exactly right quantities of ordering, how they're going to make it, where they're going to make it, when they're going to make it, and can follow through that process. So your Toyota Corolla can still be made for your customer in the future. So what are the benefits of having such an articulate and well-detailed schedule, a plan, a master production schedule? So think of master, this is the grand thing, okay? So a master production schedule, it's got all the details behind it. Who, what, where, when, how. What's the benefits of investing so much time and energy into that? Well, hopefully you're going to have a very accurate idea of your quantities and timings for your orders. You've got all that information. You know when you're making it, how much of that raw material you need and when. That accuracy, that detail and depth of information should hopefully be able to make very accurate predictions about what you need to order. It's also very clear for all staff to understand. Even if you've got young trainees or apprenticeships coming on board and making that car, they can still follow that manual, specifically to exact detail of when and where and how they're going to make that car and where they get these items from. The idea being is, in the example of a Toyota Corolla, where each car will hopefully be the same here for chocolate, okay? If it's a standardized production, you literally follow that manual and it's going to step by step lead you through that process to a high quality end result. Easy for new staff, these apprenticeships, these trainees, they're going to learn the production routines from following this manual, and hopefully you're going to reduce on wastage because it's such a well thought through document and so much years of experience have been built into it that hopefully you're going to be very accurate. So a lot of time and energy, and that is the issue really. It's very time consuming and expensive to track, record and write up this manual in the first place. And also, it's probably going to date over time. So unless you keep it up to date all the time, it's going to date, and it's very difficult to account for every situation. A small change in either a new customer coming on board and wanting some more products has to then be accounted for. And it's not very flexible to changing conditions. So the example of suddenly the COVID pandemic occurring and disrupting all these supply chains would completely throw out all this. And suddenly you're then having to adjust on the fly, so to speak. So master production schedule, very rigorous, detailed accounts of the who, what, where, when, how, all the items that go into making a product. Very good for giving us an indication of how much raw materials we need, but not very flexible to changing conditions. Okay, our next strategy in relation to materials is called materials requirement planning. And I'm guessing some of you will have had experience of this if you work in a large store like a Bunnings, or you work in a local fish and chip shop where you're ordering stock and quantities and things have been put on shelves where you're required to check what's out there and in what quantities does it need to be reordered. Okay, so what is this thing technically? So materials requirement planning, it's a process that itemizes the types and quantities of materials required to meet production targets set out in the master production schedule. So in our previous slide, we talked about this master production schedule being the ultimate guide of who, what, where, when, how, and how we make the items and the products. Here, we're talking about literally, if we break it down the words, okay, planning for how many materials we require to keep the production process going. So the idea being is it's going to include all things like the stock, what is required as part of the master production schedule to meet our production targets. What stock do we already have on hand? So looking out in the shelves and seeing what's out there already, either for the customer or for us making the product and what we actually need. And also then looking at how many do we need to order to meet this anticipated demand. So it's literally managing the level and the quantity of raw materials we actually need. Okay, so the idea being that it's going to itemize the types and quantities of materials required to meet these production targets. So we're tracking this stuff. So like I said, probably the best business applications are some of you already experiencing. So if you're doing the shelving stock control at maybe at Woolworths or Bunnings and you're going out there and you're having to tick off and itemize what's out there, then you're keeping an idea of what quantities are available for customers, what needs to be reordered, how long does it take to do that, and what point do we need to put in that order to make sure that the shelves are constantly stocked. Equally, if we're working at a fish and chip shop, okay, how much whiting do we have in the back, in the freezers, so we can make the future ones? How much flake do we have? How much snapper do we have? Okay, so the idea being working out what quantities we have and then working out what we need to order to meet the anticipated demand. If you work at a cafe, okay, how many coffee bean bags do you have in the back there? Do you have like 5 or 6? How much do you anticipate going through this period of time in the morning for your coffee shift? How much more do we need to order to make sure it's ready for the next day's shift? So that idea about literally managing and itemizing the types and quantities of materials required to meet your targets. That's what materials requirement planning is all about. So again, what's the benefit of doing materials requirement planning? Well, hopefully it's going to reduce wastage and expenses. Yeah, because you know how much stock you have on hand, how much you need to order. We don't overstock, we don't understock, we're trying to get it just right. So we're reducing the wastage of space, money, expenses of raw materials going off, etc. We're saving the amount of storage space we need because again, we're trying to get that measurement just right. None of our machinery should be sitting idle because we've always got enough stock to manage production. And hopefully we're going to improve our general environmental reputation as well because none of this stuff's being wasted and thrown in the bins at the back. We're again trying to get it not too much, not too little, just right. Disadvantages? Well, we know there always is some. Okay, so what's the disadvantages of this strategy? Well, materials requirement planning does need us to set up a dedicated system. We've got to be able to track those materials. You in your business where you work and your part-time job might have like it done electronically. It might be done with paper checks or records, but you've got to set up a system to track what's going on all the time. And you've got to constantly be reassessing, okay, how much inventory, stock do we have out there? How much more do we need to keep production going? So it can be time consuming to constantly check this. But ultimately, hopefully, it's going to be a good strategy to get your levels, hopefully, just right. Okay, a little bit of a story to set up this one about another strategy called just in time. And it's going to come back to our cake making. You know how much I'm enjoying making these cakes. I've made so many already. Okay, but we're going to have the same scenario here. I quite like this little slide. Hopefully it'll explain to you just why it's important to have this strategy called just in time in place. So again, let's pretend we're making our cakes. Okay, so here we have our eggs all ready to go. We're going to throw them in the bowl and make our little cupcakes. So here comes one. We've used up our first egg and made our first cupcake. Yes! We've used up our second egg to make the cupcake. Ooh, we're down to one egg left. We've got just enough to make our cake. So here we go. And just as we run out of the stock, along comes our chicken to lay us some more eggs. Okay? And then we can carry on converting our egg into a cupcake. So hopefully what you saw in that very sort of basic cartoony type image is the idea of just in time. We're trying to have our supplies of raw materials arrive just in time, just when we need them. So the idea being is we never have much stock sitting around being stored on site. Literally just as we get to that point where we've used up our raw materials to make the product, then the new order comes in. And so this idea of having this measurement of just exactly what is on there is absolutely critical. We need to know exactly at what point we're going to trigger this reaction to order the new supplies in. Again, we want the Goldilocks and the bear scenario. Not too much, not too little, we want it just right. And this is one strategy to try and make it just right. Okay, so being more technical with our definition now of just in time. So this is an inventory control approach that delivers the correct type and quantity of materials as soon as they are needed. So just as they are needed for production. So inventory, another word for stock. So stock control approach that delivers the right amount at the right time of the raw materials we need to continue the production line. Okay, so just as they are needed. Now, the idea being, as I said before, that measurement, that device, it requires a complex tracking of supplies. Okay, we need to know exactly what we have in our stock before we get the production. So we can exactly measure when we need to order it. So it's a very complicated tracking system. Often it's going to use computer monitoring. And we need to have a very good relationship with our suppliers. If you can understand, for the egg scenario, just as we run out, we want the farm to deliver the eggs just as we need it. So we need to be able to pick up that phone and order the new supply of truck just when we want it. And that response from the supplier needs to be there straight away as well. Now, if you can imagine, now we're scaling it up for Toyota, for the car, we need to have a great relationship with our tire suppliers, with our metal suppliers, with all the resources that go into the interior of the cars for the paint suppliers, okay? So all these companies that are our suppliers, we need to have a great relationship because we want them to respond straight away when we place that order, whether it's via a computer tracking order, which is automatically is got a sensor and it instantly fires off the request for new products just as the sensor realizes the raw material is getting low, or via a very good phone system where we can see it by ourselves from tracking it and suddenly we place through the new order. So we need a great relationship with the supplier, and that'll become important when we look at the strengths and weaknesses of this approach. So what are some examples of where we see businesses applying just in time? Well, one of the most famous ones, as I've already alluded to, is the Toyota production system, where they use this for organizing all the supplies, whether it be for your Toyota Camrys, Corollas, their forklift trucks, all the products that Toyota produce will use this production system of just in time, where they're tracking the raw materials and making sure the supplies or whatever components or raw materials they need arrive just as they need it. Another example is Apple. Apple uses this as well for iPads and iPhones as they're pulling in raw materials from around the globe to their factory production line, which is mainly in China. They're pulling all that in. They want the items to arrive just in time, all those components to arrive just in time so they're not taking up storage space. And probably on a day-to-day level, some of you work maybe with McDonald's, but also as customers, you'd have seen this as well, that you want fast food restaurants like McDonald's to have their deliveries of burgers arrive just in time, have their deliveries of the buns arrive just in time, the salads, etc. You don't want to have huge stockpiles of meat and buns and fresh produce like your salads just stored at the back of the stores. Most of those places that you go to frequent as a fast food restaurants don't have the space to have that. So you don't want that. And so if you've been working at some of these places, you'll know you have a regular delivery of supplies, hopefully arriving just in time. So you don't need to take up too much storage space for all these items in what is really the delivery center for customers. So all these orders are generally not assembled until purchases have been made to keep them as fresh as possible and to reduce the amount of space that's taken up for storage. So as a material strategy, just in time can give great benefits to a business. When it's working really well, the idea being is you should nearly eliminate all waste because you're trying to get that level of raw material just right, that you're only ordering just as you need it. So you're not wasting space, you're not wasting money tied up in capital in terms of the raw materials. You're not wasting all of those extra things because everything's just arriving just at time. So it should, in theory, reduce all wastage of your raw materials. Another benefit is that there's the bare minimum of cash trapped up in what is called the asset of the raw material, okay? Because you just only order them just as you need them. So you haven't had to have that money invested just sitting there doing nothing. Instantly, as soon as it arrives, it gets made into a product which then can be sold. You're reducing the storage space, or hopefully having no storage space if you've got it perfectly defined. And also, there shouldn't be any idle machines because everything's in beautiful poetry. Just as you make it, in comes the new resources so you can make some more products. So you're keeping that lovely flow going. Now, at this point here, we can see just how important it is to have that supplier beautifully aligned, that the phone call or the order is arriving just at that point. Now, you can imagine, because you've got no spare resources at all, anything goes wrong with your supplier, then your production line effectively stops. If for any reason your supplier has a delivery problem and can't get the items to you on time, if for any reason they have a strike and they stop production of the components that you need for production, at any point like that, you have no storage or spare capacity of raw materials that can carry on the production line. And so suddenly your production line stops as a direct result. So you are hugely reliant on them to deliver on time all of the time. If this fails, the entire production line is at the very minimum disrupted, but most likely completely halted by the issues that are occurring with your suppliers. Now, equally, if you're having regular deliveries, then your delivery costs may also increase as well. If you're having a daily delivery at McDonald's of fresh salads and you're having to keep up with that and you're paying for those transport costs, then that equally is going to be more expensive than getting a once in a year delivery of huge salads which you freeze and keep in readiness. Okay, so your delivery costs may increase from more frequent deliveries, but the big issue is this one here, is your reliance on the suppliers to do it just when you want it and to keep it going, because in theory you have no flexibility with additional raw materials on hand if for any reason your suppliers don't arrive just in time. So a great contemporary case study of the just-in-time strategy in place is Toyota. As I've mentioned already, Toyota was one of the first to implement this way back in 1970 and is still one of the most successful companies practicing just-in-time systems. They describe their method as the Toyota production system, which sees that raw materials are not brought to the production floor until the order is received from the customer and the product is ready to be built. This keeps them out of inventory to a minimum, which lowers costs. So they are an exponent of the just-in-time approach where literally just when these robots need the components, just when that comes in, then a new one comes in to replace it. So we're ordering items just as we need it to keep that production line rolling smoothly without any additional excess of raw materials held up in storage. Now, as an example of just how critical the suppliers are to this just-in-time strategy, here's an example in Korea of the Korea Cargo Workers Union. They went on strike in June 2022, refusing to transport many types of goods, including automobile parts. So here you have a cargo workers distribution company refusing to do automobile parts. Now, if you can imagine, you are a producer of cars and you're relying on those automobile parts to arrive, then suddenly when this delivery just ceases, then clearly you have no other raw materials on hand to continue a production line if you're using this just-in-time approach. And lo and behold, this is what happened. Within just hours of the strike coming into effect, Hyundai's production line in Ulsan, the biggest car manufacturing facility in the world, were forced to stop. So when your supplier has an issue, you have an issue. When the supplier can't make the raw materials come to your production line, then suddenly you have no spare raw materials to draw upon to keep the production line going, and that stops as well. So hopefully that illustrates to you just how important these suppliers are. If they break down, you break down. Okay, so let's look at a worked example of how some of this content knowledge can come to the fore, either in a SAC or an examination type question, and how you're going to structure your response. Now, this was an adaptation of a past examination question from the VCAR November exam. So hopefully we'll demonstrate here just how you can structure a response to get the very best marks possible. So the question was, describe So we need to add some detail. Describe how one, and you've got a choice in this examination question. So you've got a choice from forecasting or just in time. And we're going to base our response today on forecasting. Okay, so describe how one of the following strategies could be used in the house cleaning business. So if you think for yourself, I'm not sure how much cleaning you do around your own home, but if you were to use vacuum cleaners, mops, if you use cleaning devices, if you're going to spray down and get rid of dust, if you're going to make sure the cookers are all clean, if you're going to clean out the toilets, all of that is the house cleaning business. Okay, so that's the scenario you've got to put in your mind and how we might use forecasting or just in time to try and achieve that. Now, looking through the response first before we even get there, you can see this was the spread of the marks, that the average was only 1.7 out of 3 in terms of the marks, with a bunch of students unfortunately getting only 0 or just 1. So what's that, like 36% getting 1 or less for this response. And why was the main reason that students struggled? It wasn't just the theory, it was the application to this house cleaning business. So like I said, we've got to try and draw in, okay, what does a house cleaning business do? Okay, they're doing vacuum cleaning, mopping, they're going to be cleaning away dust, they might be cleaning dishes, etc. So we're using cleaning products, and we need to be using either forecasting or just in time to help us do that. So here's our structure. First we've got to describe, in this case here we're going to go with forecasting from Mark, and then we've got to be able to apply it to this cleaning business scenario, and hopefully you can see that on this answer. So let's start off first of all with a theory. The cleaning business could use forecasting. We've identified straight away to the assessor, we know what we're talking about. I'm going to tell them what it is. Forecasting is a material strategy that involves analysing past data and market trends to make an educated prediction about customer demand for an upcoming period. Cool, we know our theory. Now we've got to apply it to cleaning. The cleaning business could analyse this data and make predictions about the amount of materials, for example, sponges or staff, as in our labour resource, required to meet customer demand for an upcoming period, i.e., if a holiday like Christmas is approaching and there's a demand for house cleaning. So the idea being that we can see a peak period when people want their houses clean, ready for the Christmas period, having family over. So there's an additional demand therefore on the service, and then therefore there's an additional demand on having labour and also sponges and cleaning materials to meet that demand. The cleaning business will be prepared as they will predict this demand and order sufficient materials. They sufficiently manage materials by reducing waste, optimising resources, as it presents the possibility of over-ordering and therefore inventory stock expiring or being damaged. Furthermore, this will improve productivity by preventing horse production caused by insufficient materials. So this answer here, one draws in the theory, but also applies it to this example of the cleaning business. And that would hopefully therefore allow you to achieve those 4 marks available. Okay, so in this lesson, we've covered material strategies to try and improve the efficiency and effectiveness of operations management. And these are the 4 we need to get into our heads and feel really comfortable with, that we can identify them, describe them, discuss them, compare them, and evaluate them. So our ability to draw this all in together. So let's take them very briefly in turn. Forecasting. The idea being that we can predict customer demand for a future period based on the past data and market trends. So we're looking to the past for information to help guide us anticipate what we need to produce for the future. The next one, the master production schedule. This is the who, what, where, when, how. This is the complete user manual for what we make, how we make it, when we make it, what we need to make it, all of that put into a manual so it can guide people to make the right amount of products. And by doing that, it allows us to work out what we need to do in terms of our raw materials, and therefore gives us a guide to how much of these raw materials we need to continue this production targets being met. Our next strategy, materials requirement planning. It's literally knowing the numbers of materials we need, the raw materials we need, in what quantity, and how we need to reorder that. So it's the idea about the types and quantities of materials we need to have to meet those production targets. So it's about quantities. And then the final one, just in time. This arguably awesome strategy where we're getting materials to arrive just as we need them. So just as we're tracking the items being made and produced and we're running out of raw materials, just as we get to the last one, that's when we order in the new one. So they arrive just in time so we can continue making our goods and services. So the idea being is this delivers the correct type and quantity just as they are needed for production. So there's our 4 strategies for materials management. What we're going to move on to our next lesson is quality and how we can improve the production line from quality strategies. Look forward to seeing you then.